True Crime Declassified is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Declassified, where we go behind the scenes of your favourite true crime content and creators. Today, I want to talk about a true crime series that has made waves both in the true crime community and the wider media. Before we dive straight into the subject of The Staircase, a small disclaimer. I've changed the names of the family members affected by the crime and subsequent documentaries. The reason for this will soon become apparent. Let's start with some background about The Staircase. All of the sources used in this podcast will be listed in the description. The original documentary was produced and released in 2004 by Jean-Xavier de Lestrade, a French writer, producer and director. De Lestrade had previously released Murder on a Sunday Morning, which won an Oscar, so The Staircase was much anticipated. The documentary told the story of our victim. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah was a mother and wife as well as a successful businesswoman. On the 9th of December 2021, her husband, we will call him Jeremy, called the emergency services after he found Sarah unconscious. In the phone call, Jeremy reported that she had likely fallen down a flight of stairs. Earlier in the day, Jeremy had been in their swimming pool before finding his wife at the bottom of the stairs at 2:40 p.m. Jeremy theorized that she had fallen after consuming alcohol and Valium, but a toxicology report said that her blood alcohol content was low. In the post-mortem report, it was found that Sarah had several lacerations to the back of her head, consistent with a blunt object, and had died from blood loss upwards of 2 hours after she received the lacerations. Jeremy's defense team hired a forensic expert who testified that the blood splatter was consistent with an accidental fall down the stairs, but the police disagreed, and Jeremy was charged with Sarah's murder. According to many sources, like iNews, he pleaded not guilty, and his defense stated that Sarah could not have been beaten, arguing that her skull had not been fractured and her brain was not damaged. In the trial, the prosecution brought up Jeremy's alleged misreporting of his military service and supposed secret gay life, a very 2001 reason to prosecute someone. They argued that Sarah and Jeremy had led an unhappy marriage, which she had wanted to end after discovering his secret sexuality. Despite this, Jeremy's defense argued that Sarah knew he was bisexual and they had a happy marriage. Combined with the $1.5 million or £1.2 million life insurance, the prosecution presented a seemingly compelling case. Some have claimed that as a columnist for the Durham Herald-Sun, Jeremy openly criticized police officers in Durham, North Carolina, as well as the district attorney, who would later prosecute Jeremy for Sarah's murder. However, it should be noted that I could not access these columns to verify this claim. To complicate matters further, the prosecution brought up the death of Jeremy's friend in 1985, who was found dead at the foot of her stairs. Their theory, this experience inspired Jeremy to fake Sarah's death. In 2003, Jeremy was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From my research, the evidence seems wildly circumstantial, and there was no DNA linking Jeremy to the crime. That is to say, I'm not here to guess whether he actually did it or not, because how could I, a writer from the UK, possibly say for certain? I'm here to discuss how Sarah's death brings into question the ethics of true crime documentaries. In 2017, after spending 14 years in prison, Jeremy submitted an Alford plea, where the defendant maintains they're innocent, but admits that the prosecution's evidence would likely result in a guilty verdict if brought to trial. The plea was successful, and Jeremy walked free. WRAL, a news station in North Carolina, reported that Jeremy had originally pleaded guilty, while a Forbes article maintains that he consistently pleaded his innocence despite the differing details he gave about the case. This suggests that there's potentially disparities between how the media reported the trial. Ultimately, whether Jeremy killed Sarah or not, the fallout from the crime continues to impact both Sarah and Jeremy's families. Which brings me back to why I've changed the names of the people affected. The original documentary by Jean-Xavier de Lestrade received praise for its exceptional quality and was even awarded a Peabody Award in 2005. The series allegedly had access to Jeremy's extended family, the defense attorneys, and the courtroom to offer audiences a unique view of the trial. de Lestrade also allegedly interviewed jurors to hear why they reached their guilty verdict, then followed up the series with The Staircase 2, The Last Chance, which documented Jeremy's retrial. The Staircase was later parodied by Trial and Error, an NBC series that featured a character based on Jeremy who is described as always making himself look guilty. In 2022, HBO Max released a miniseries based on The Staircase, featuring Colin Firth, Toni Collette, and Sophie Turner. This series immediately received mixed reviews. It was accused by the original documentary team of including factual inaccuracies and misleading information, with de Lestrade reportedly saying he felt betrayed by HBO, who supposedly questioned his integrity and professionalism. Jeremy also accused de Lestrade of selling out the story to HBO and said that he wasn't informed that the series was being made. This raises some interesting questions about whether he should have been informed, considering the story centers around him and whether he murdered his wife. While corresponding with Variety magazine, Jeremy reflected on how he was portrayed in the story, saying that HBO trashed him and his children with the fictional account of events. Jeremy alleged that there are egregious fabrications and distortions of the truth in the HBO series, well beyond what may be considered artistic license. Arguably, one of the main victims in all of this, the person who has nothing to do with the murder case but continues to be impacted, is Jeremy's adopted daughter. We will call her Natalie. After reading an article about her experience, I wanted to make this podcast and talk about The Staircase. In the original documentary, Natalie agreed to take part under extreme circumstances. Jeremy reportedly struggled to protect his daughters and feared that he would not get a fair trial. So according to Vanity Fair, he told his children that having cameras document the trial would safeguard the legal proceedings. In her interview with Vanity Fair, Natalie said that she feared he would face the death penalty, so agreed to de Lestrade's documentary in the hopes that it would protect her father. She also noted that she didn't believe it would be widely seen by audiences. After Jeremy was sentenced, Natalie and her family tried to move on with their lives. Natalie reports feeling parentless and did not want to talk about The Staircase. When Netflix acquired the docuseries in 2018 and The Staircase became accessible to over 120 million subscribers, she said that everything changed. She was suddenly being recognised for her involvement, not just by true crime fanatics, but general audiences too. Natalie recalled being on holiday in Denmark, where the only English thing showing on the TV at the hotel was The Staircase. Imagine it, going on holiday and the only thing in your language being a docuseries about the death of your own mother. I couldn't even begin to comprehend how that must have felt for her. Apparently, people would stare at her while she was just trying to eat breakfast at the hotel. Possibly due to her early involvement with the docuseries, though that is my own assumption, Natalie pursued a career in documentary filmmaking. Let's keep in mind that unlike Jeremy, she was not suspected of her mother's death and she has not been a part of the trial. She has always been a grieving daughter. That's not to say that Jeremy deserved the media scrutiny, but Natalie's only connection to the case is through grief. And yet, when Natalie applied for her dream job at Netflix's documentary department, The Staircase stood in her way. Despite being qualified and the HR representative being excited for Natalie to take the role, the moment they recognized her from the original Staircase documentary, an executive producer told her that she would not get the job because it would be a conflict of interest. You cannot see me, but I did do air quotes around conflict of interest. Natalie has since said that she believes documentary participants should have an organisation to inform them of their rights, provide legal advice, and help navigate complicated consent issues. She took part in a documentary called Subject, which examines the ethics of documentary filmmaking. In her interview, Natalie said that in hindsight, she wished she had negotiated better consent and release agreements. This may not be the glamorous side of true crime that we know and love, but it is just as important to discuss. Her father reportedly asked, Is it really ethically acceptable to take a living person like my child and then create this fantasy fiction about them, and stated that it should not be this way, that filmmakers can do whatever they want with your lives? I want to do a little bit of an experiment here with you on this recording. You're going to hear some typing as I Google Natalie's real full name. This is something that potential partners, employers, or anyone who has met you may do. I know I've done it before. I did it to my husband before I met him. So let's see what we find. When you type Natalie's real name, you find her IMDb page and some information about her roles in the entertainment industry. You also find, just scrolling down, news articles about her mother's death, and of course there it is, the staircase. There are even options to search for her biological father at the bottom of Google's People Also Ask section. I don't recall him having anything to do with the case, but people are searching for her biological father. They're also searching for her sister, who also had nothing to do with the case, and there are Reddit posts. This one is calling her smug, and this one is theorizing that she has daddy issues. It's great to be a woman in public. Natalie has obviously tried to reclaim the narrative. I'm seeing some interviews and press releases that she's done in the search results, but it looks like sites like Reddit just facilitate this wild speculation and guesswork. I mentioned earlier that I'm not here to say whether Jeremy murdered his wife or not, because how could I? I know nothing about the intricacies of the case. I am a 20-something-year-old UK woman who writes for a living. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an investigator, so all I can go off are articles, which is why I'm citing them in the description so you can see where I got my information from. Despite this, all it took was a quick Google search to find a Reddit post demanding that Natalie explain why she believes her father is innocent. This user has laid out these demands from her, asking, how do you explain the blood splatter, and do you seriously believe he did not kill her? As if a bereaved daughter can and should answer those questions. To people like that, I say, these people are not here to give you answers. They are not here to entertain you. They are here to grieve and process and try and do something with their lives that doesn't have to do with the trauma they experienced. So what does HBO say about all of this? A spokesperson defended the series to Vanity Fair, saying that it is a fictionalized series, again, quotation marks, based on true events, and that each episode includes a disclaimer. I take a slight issue with calling it a fictionalized series, considering the names of the characters, the experiences of the characters are all reminiscent of true events. How far removed does something have to be before we can call it fictional? I certainly would not consider The Staircase a fictional series. They obviously think it is, and they may include a disclaimer at the beginning of every episode. But this is not a series about Jack the Ripper or any other historic true crime case. The people affected, like Natalie, like her sister, and like her biological father, who is being pulled into this, are all still alive. In episode 1 of True Crime Declassified, I spoke to Crimes Through Time, and if you haven't listened, I recommend you do, because the host of the podcast I spoke to talks about historic crimes for this very reason, because there is not a living relative to be harmed by the content. And I'm not saying that every true crime content creator should only talk about crimes from 100 years ago, but if you are going to talk about crimes from the last few decades, there is a certain level of responsibility that I believe you should have. And I don't believe that HBO Max felt that responsibility, or if they did not do the family justice. Jeremy also criticised how The Staircase includes 3 graphic and violent death scenes, depicting Sarah being murdered by Jeremy, falling down the stairs, and being attacked by an owl. It's important to ask, what does seeing that kind of violence do to people like Natalie, forced to relive her mother's death at the hands of Colin Firth? Natalie said that her sister watched the trailer for HBO's The Staircase, but was so traumatized that she refused to watch the series. Though Natalie recognises the artistic value of de Lestrade's original docuseries, she called it a phenomenal documentary. She said that if she could go back, she would not take part. HBO's remake feels wildly unnecessary. I can't help but think, what does it hope to achieve? True crime without direction or a purpose feels exploitative, and that is exactly how I would describe HBO Max's remake. They're not doing this to raise awareness. They're not doing this to raise money for the family who are affected by it. They're doing it to entertain. I chose to change the names of the people in this podcast because I didn't want it to be just another entry in the search results linking Natalie to the case. And I think as a genre, true crime content and documentary filmmakers should take more responsibility for how they tell the stories of living people. This sort of thing, I find it so interesting and important to talk about. It's a huge part of my PhD where I look into the ethics of true crime as a fan of true crime, because so much of the research I have come across have been criticism from people who haven't really engaged with the genre. And I think the genre can do so much good when it has a positive purpose, when it's used as a vehicle to discuss societal issues or raise awareness for people that may be in need. But when it's done for the sake of retelling a story, not even telling it for the first time around and raising awareness for it, retelling it and putting these big celebrities at the helm, I can't help but think that it wasn't done for the right reasons.